I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your counsellor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, good to have you with us for another TGU, which stands for the Governance Update, the flagship program from VLGA Connect, and flying the flag from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. Our terrific sponsors is Tony Rownick. Hi Tony.
G'day, Chris. Big week in the Rownick household. I was telling you earlier, I think my staff have been calling me grandpa behind my back, but they can do that accurately now, as that I've become a nono this week. One of my daughters has had a beautiful baby granddaughter, Florence. So exciting time in the Rownick household.
Absolutely. Congratulations, Granddad. That's good news. Or Grandpa. What would you prefer?
Well, I've taken a cue from my late father, Luciano, and I'm to be Nono.
Nono. Okay. Well, there you go. Well, that's great news. And spring is in the air, and we've just got a buzz about the place, haven't we, at the moment, with a little bit of warmth, and no shortage, as always, of local government stories to talk about. And I know people, because they keep telling me, really enjoy this opportunity in 45 minutes or so to just get a snapshot of things that are happening around the state and beyond, in some cases, in the sector. And fresh news this morning, Tony, I know you were up early reading your newspapers, and The Age has the story that there's a new statewide levy likely to be imposed soon by the government on short stay accommodation. Some interesting implications from this, if it's true.
Yes. Reporting that state cabinet early next week on Monday, in fact, they're saying we'll consider this new short-term accommodation levy to be imposed on companies like Stays and Airbnb. Apparently, the proposal going to state cabinet is a levy of up to 7.5% on short stays. Hotels would be exempt, but other short stay accommodation would be subject to this levy, which of course would create a pool of money for state government to presumably spend on such things as affordable housing potentially. One wonders there, well, where does that sit with the more local initiatives that some local councils, Bass Coast recently is an example, but I think City of Melbourne, Warrnambool, a number of councils have discussed their own local levies on short stay accommodation. And I would think that the two potentially would just sit together, the state levy and then an additional sort of local tax potentially, or additional rating arrangement. But we'll watch that.
Yeah,
with interest.
Tony, a few thoughts running through my mind there. One being, surely all of these costs are just going to be passed on in the pricing of the short stay accommodation. So you can imagine what the Airbnb types are going to be saying about this.
It certainly will be passed on, and already in that article, there's speculation about the flow through increases in the cost of accommodation in different parts of the state. And although I would say that the short stays industry has actually been calling for a statewide levy as opposed to the more, localized treatments. It might differ. Yeah.
That would make sense, that you'd want that sort of certainty so that you haven't got different arrangements in place. The other thought that crosses my mind, if this is going to cabinet next week, cabinet in confidence, I thought that stuff was really, really secret. How does this stuff make the newspaper? I speculate.
Well, I think, as you might be alluding to, these might be deliberate drips from those involved, and of course, this is apparently part of an overall housing strategy that will be discussed by cabinet next week, and that, for our friends in local government, we immediately go to, well, does that include, say, planning law reform that's been mooted since Operation Sandon and the recommendations there? So potentially some major announcements next week.
And Tony, I'm reminded, I can't think exactly where it was. I think it was possibly Queensland just in the last week or so, some research that came out actually showing that all of these measures to put costs on short stay accommodation, the intention being to convert short stay properties into long-term rental options. Apparently the research is suggesting it's not actually having that effect.
Yeah, that is interesting. So I guess it's just, as you say, the cost being passed on to people who use those short stays, and they're evidently prepared to absorb that cost and pay those extra fees. And the landowners, if that research is accurate, prefer the short stay model to longer term, rental arrangements.
Yeah. All right. So that story is in The Age this morning. You've had a chance to read it. I haven't yet, Tony. I chose to walk the dogs instead of read the papers this morning. So that's
I reckon
my fault.
you made the better decision.
Yeah. One story I did see earlier in the week, which has been a bit of reporting on, is The Block. I've never watched it. Have you watched it? Do you watch The Block?
Oh,
Apparently
there's some guy called Scott, apparently.
Yeah. Apparently it's a top rating television program where they renovate homes or build homes, and they compete for different things. It was coming and it is top rating, so let's not quibble
I'd watch
about
you
that.
with a hammer and a saw, Chris. I'd watch that if you went on.
Would you? Yeah, no, I think you'd give up pretty quickly, actually, Tony. The Block apparently was looking at a site in Daylesford in Hepburn Shire. What my take on this, Tony, is what's happened is that there's been some objections to the planning application, which is still being dealt with by the council, but some local residents, I think, have indicated that they intend to appeal it to VCAT if it's approved. And the Block has a policy of not getting caught up in those types of issues, and have said we'll go somewhere else, which is a bit of a loss to Hepburn Shire in terms of the economic impact and the exposure.
We don't go where we aren't welcome, the producers at Channel 9 have apparently said. And look, it is a sort of a hallmark site. It's on Midland Highway, on that sort of the road between Daylesford and Castlemaine. There's a row of, I think, cypress type trees on this property at the moment, and so there is a fair bit of local interest in the proposed development of the site, the removal of trees, those sorts of things. And as you say, with the level of local resident opposition, although it's not yet determined, it seems that the producers at Channel 9 have decided that they will look elsewhere for their site. They're wanting 3/4 acre blocks or something of that nature. I've got mixed views on this. I understand, I'm a ratepayer. I've got a house in Hepburn Springs, and there is an element of the local community that would say, we really don't want the extra traffic and the extra sort of interest that comes, and the people coming through the town short term because of this. But it would be no doubt a boon for local business and tourism, and certainly advertise the delights of Hepburn Shire to a very broad sort of national audience. So
I think I read, Tony, someone put a figure of $500,000 or more on it in terms of the economic impact of having the crew in the town for that period of time.
Yeah, so I did hear the Mayor Brian Hood quoted, and I think council might still hold aspirations that that the Block may still have some interest in pursuing things at council, whether that's this season or another season. But for now it seems that they're looking elsewhere.
Yeah. All right. Interesting set of circumstances there. What's been interesting too, Tony, is to see how the media portrays the whole planning process here. They don't get it. They don't explain it very well. And no wonder people get confused about how local government planning processes work.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the case, of course, that interested parties have rights to put their views, and there's a process that can end up at the tribunal. And one would think that a national broadcaster would have put that in taken account of that with their timelines and been aware that that's just a normal thing, particularly where you have, a cluster of potential residences, subdivisions in such a such a significant location.
Yeah.
But anyway, they move on, it seems.
Absolutely. All right. Hume City Council has been in the news for us a bit of late. This time around, fines issued under domestic animal legislation, which apparently have been proven to be ultra vires because an ad wasn't circulated in a local newspaper. Is that still really a requirement in some of the legislation, Tony?
Yes, yes, an ad in the local newspaper and publication in the government gazette. We still see that as a requirement for royal assent, as they used to call it as well. But the Domestic Animals Act 1994 has a section 26, which allows councils by resolution to prohibit or impose conditions on dogs and cats in public places. And there's an explicit subparagraph that says, the order must, not should, must be published in the government gazette and in a local newspaper. And it seems that there's been an oversight and that might not have occurred. And so council has collected fines from some owners of dogs and cats, I think for dogs being off leash, etc., when they're not supposed to be, and has announced that they will refund those fines. Look, I think council's doing the right thing here. It's very much a short-term issue. No doubt council will rectify this and make the appropriate publications so that their that local control, if you like, is enforceable moving forwards. But interesting. It's about dotting your I's and crossing your T's, isn't it?
Well, it is, and there, but for the grace of God go I, and many other council people might be thinking as they listen to this. So, Tony, what is curious to me is I think this is under the domestic animal legislation. Some of the legislation that local government needs to comply with has removed that requirement to advertise in a local newspaper because people get their information differently now, haven't they? So is there an issue here about these different, some archaic sort of requirements that still exist in some little corners of the legislation?
Well, yes. I mean, I think in some municipalities, you'd struggle to find a local newspaper.
Exactly.
You'd be going to a Metro Daily. You'd have to do this in, So, the demise of the leader newspapers and that is well known. So, I think this is a case of the legislation lagging behind the times. Advertising on council's website or some social media platforms might be more appropriate, more appropriate language at least. But we've got to work with the law that's there, and the 1994 legislation still applying now. And good one for councils to just be aware of that section 26(3) provision.
Absolutely. That story's in the Star Weekly if people want to read a bit more about that. We've had another councillor resignation this week. I think we've hit the 50 mark in terms of required countbacks or by-elections for this term of the council, Tony. This one's at Maroondah, Marika Graham. What was interesting here, I think, is yet another councillor stepping down and saying it's because they can't contribute the time that the role needs due to other commitments, but really suggesting that the demands on a councillor's time are far and above what people might have expected when they went into the role.
I think those demands are growing. I noticed that Councillor Graham, she was on council for 7 years, so it's not as if she gave it a very good stint. She was deputy mayor for a period as well. She was re-elected once. She says, I'm putting health, family, career, etc. first. I'm a little sort of, maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned. I like the concept of community service rather than a career on council, and so that idea that we've got to remunerate councillors as a full-time job. part of me says, I see the value in, people deciding to go on council, not as a career, but as a, contribution back to the community, inspiring people, etc. But no doubt the expectations of the community, particularly with social media and that now, are very high. The demands on councillors are high. And I do think it's a tougher gig in 2023 than it was in, 2020 and in the 1990s, etc. And it's increasingly, more demanding.
Tony, the now former councillor Graham also said a few things in her Facebook post about a lack of diversity on councillor groups. My sense was she was talking more broadly across the sector, and we know that is an issue. We're not fully representative of the community across and around council tables yet, but she did say that she doesn't think that's going to change until expectations of councillors change, as in societal expectations, and that the role is better remunerated to reflect the time that's put in. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I can appreciate that the role sometimes more easily lends itself to people who might be retirees or might have a bit more time on their hands, and therefore we do see often less people in their 20s and 30s and as councillors, and perhaps she was referring to that age diversity. Certainly Maroondah has excellent gender diversity. I think until Councillor Graham retired, there were 5 women and 4 men.
Right.
So we've made great strides in relation to diversity, but I think it is the case that people with demanding jobs, family demands, etc., find it hard to balance those with the time expectations of being a councillor.
All right, so I think that's one of the few that's going to need a by-election rather than a countback, and keep listening to the Roundup twice weekly for some details on when that will occur. We'll report that once we receive the advice from the VEC. There's a new council council alliance, I should say, that's been launched. Tony, a bit of a restructuring.
A lot of people got excited when you said
Yes, I
that,
know.
Chris.
Yes. Sorry to give you false hope. Perhaps I was thinking about that last story about councillors wanting to be better remunerated. A new Greater Ballarat Alliance has been announced and launched, and there's a bit of a tweaking of that sort of regional alliance membership we've seen in recent times.
Yeah, so 6 councils: City of Ballarat, Central Goldfields, Moorabool, Golden Plains, Pyrenees and Hepburn have joined together in that Greater Ballarat Alliance. On their website, they say, we're uniting our voices to tackle common issues, advocate for meaningful change across our region. They've got 3 key headings for their priorities, and first was transport objectives, things like public transport improvements, upgrading roads, freight routes. Second was growth objectives, social and affordable housing, planning law reform, supporting infrastructure. And third, I was interested in the third. I thought this was an interesting one: digital connectivity, and just shows you, how where we've moved. But that. There is a strength in councils joining together and becoming, louder, more prominent advocates. I think this group sort of replaces what was called the Central Highlands Councils group.
Yeah, which had, I think, Ararat and Northern Grampians in it. So I'm not sure whether they've reformed in line with some other councils or not. But yeah, a bit of a tweaking, as I said, of the membership arrangements there.
But all power to the group, and as I say, some of these regional formations have been shown to be very effective in the past in terms of joining groups of councils together to have a more prominent voice.
Yes, strength in numbers and to advocate for their regions, and that's a theme in our next story. A few councils now starting to realise and point out that they've been excluded from the state's Growing Suburbs Fund. And we're talking about the peri-urban councils. I think Bass Coast was one to come out and speak about this very recently. The peri-urban councils are those that are sort of on the fringe, but they're not necessarily growth councils. and the Growing Suburbs Fund has been cut from $50 to $10 million this year. So perhaps not a surprise that the catchment for that money has been curtailed as well.
Yeah, it seems to be winding down somewhat, that fund, but the peri-urban councils are, have really significant demands upon them. So Bor, Bass Coast, Surf Coast, Golden Plains, and Moorabool, 180,000 people reside in those council areas, but nearly 40,000 of their residents commute every day to work outside the peri-urban region. So, an element of a dormitory area, but also they're the kind of the food bowl for the metro area in terms of supplying, fruit and vegetables to Melbourne. So, really critically important areas of the state, and so there's a bit less funding, available to that critical geographic area.
And they're in an awkward spot. I think it was Moorabool. I saw some press on, it might have been the mayor of Moorabool, talking about how, they're not regarded as regional, they're not regarded as metro, but it might differ from a state recognition to a federal recognition point as they try to have some certainty about where they're going to apply for funding for particular projects. All of a sudden, it feels like they're in limbo, doesn't it?
I can imagine there'll be a lot of chat amongst those peri-urban councils about how do we continue to raise the profile and of peri-urban communities, and the unique, as you've pointed out, the unique situation they're in with being not quite rural and regional, but also having to accommodate some of those rural and regional uses.
Yeah. Another one of those wicked problems in local government land. La Trobe Council put out a statement this week, Tony, after we discussed, not because of our discussion, but we discussed the arbiter's finding on a code of conduct matter there. I gather they felt the need to clarify that they'd followed a particular and proper process in bringing that report to the council.
Yeah. I think a statement from the Mayor, Kelly O'Callaghan, always difficult to make these statements while processes are underway. And now that the Council Conduct Framework process has been completed, I think appropriate statement. Also, I think acknowledging that there was some hurt in the community caused by some of the comments which were the subject of the Council of Conduct consideration, and that pointing out the council remains committed to diversity in the community, and just I think an appropriate statement by the mayor.
The matter, of course, related to a councillor's use of social media, which was found to have been offensive to parts of the community. And I see that councillor got some support from a former councillor and a pretty well-known now state member of parliament.
Yes, I think Moira Deeming did come out and make some commentary on social media. Supportive commentary. We know that Moira's got some controversial views on this area as well.
Yeah. All right. We might leave that one there. There's a distinct regional flavour to most of the stories that we're talking about today. A new report from Planned Resources, which is a public sector recruitment firm, looking at the advantage of regional councils and communities in the housing affordability discussion for attracting staff. They've done some interesting research, Tony, that compares house prices and rental prices alongside commute times. And they're pretty much saying regional councils have a bit of a trump card here to play for attracting staff when you bring the affordability issue into the discussion rather than just salary.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw an incredible statistic. It was at both ends of the extremes, but it said that in terms of the ratio of, house price to salary for an average council employee, in Stonington, it's 24.43 times your average council employee salary to buy a house in Stonington, 24.43 times. In Yarriambiac, 2.46. So
it's massive, isn't it?
Huge. And I have picked the two extremes, folks.
Yeah.
But and you and I know growing up in regional areas, Chris, and I know we both maintain those connections in terms of where we have residences. There is beyond the financial benefits, there's a lifestyle benefit of rural areas. This study's identified the reduced commute times, but there are also potential concerns about professional development, employment opportunities, advancement in employment, etc. So it is a conundrum, but I think it's a really useful tool for council employees to look at and consider the pros and cons of a metro location versus a regional rural location.
I spoke to Cindy Tran from Planned Resources about that report for the roundup. I think it was Wednesday's edition. If anyone wants to go back and have a listen to a little bit more of the detail on that very interesting report. Bit of interstate news to touch on, Tony. For my sins, I watched a council meeting of Ku-ring-gai Council in Sydney during the week. Why would I do that? It was the meeting where they were getting together to consider a rescission motion to overturn the sacking of their general manager, John McKee, I think is his name. I don't know if you had a chance to watch this on YouTube, Tony. The councillors basically disappeared before they got to the point of having to vote on it, and the quorum couldn't be maintained.
I didn't watch the meeting, but I did read there was a lack of quorum there, and I think that was a strategic, absence of quorum, which is interesting. So, I mean, the uncertainty continues, I guess, in terms of the position of the GM at Ku-ring-gai City Council. Are they currently, I think, dismissed? Will they be reinstalled? What will be occurring? And hopefully get some clarity for that local community as much as the employees of the council, the key lead employee, the GM, and the councillors going forward.
It's just another example of how the CEO or GM role can become part of the political environment and be overly size. I know I'll probably attract some criticism for this view, but it's a view that I do have, that the CEO's role can be too much caught up in the politics. So here we've had a GM sacked without notice. That's been put on hold because of a rescission motion, which was due to be considered this week at an extraordinary meeting. It didn't happen. That person is still on tenterhooks and in limbo until I think the 19th next week, when it'll come back, and maybe there'll be some resolution to the matter.
And I think, Chris, comments, I'm not sure how helpful they are, but comments from statement members about the process, whether it was about, these sorts of things. I don't know that they're necessarily helpful weighing into an employment decision like this.
In this case, a local MP texted councillors the morning after the decision to terminate, congratulating them and giving them some advice on what they should be looking for in the next
I'm sure
general
manager. Thank you. Yeah.
So if that's not politicising the role of the chief executive, I don't know what is. All right. We'll bring you another update next week if there is one on that. Up on the Gold Coast, the councillor accused of murder has pleaded not guilty, is out on bail. Looked like may or may not have continued to serve as councillor, has accepted a temporary suspension through until the next elections, which are in March. No great surprise there, Tony. The interesting thing here is what they've done for the interim. They've appointed a replacement councillor who won't have voting rights.
Oh, that struck me too. And former councillor Margaret Grummett, I think is her name, and they call it a temporary advisory role for the division, which is like a ward. So she gets to attend meetings, but she has no voting rights. And what astounded me was, I think she found out about it, her appointment, through the announcement in the press. She said, the council had asked for my CV. They were going to send it to government, but I wasn't quite sure what the role was. And I won't be running for council next election. I'm far too busy for that. So I just kind of wonder how well that stopgap measure will actually turn out to be.
Well, I think the fact that she said she's not running probably was one of the things that appealed to them about her as an option for that interim period. But why have a temporary observer councillor who can't vote? Obviously, she can put in the views and perspectives of the community of that division, but that's as far as it's going to go.
It also says that they're far too busy to be involved.
Yeah.
So look, I guess she'll be drawing on some of her views as a former councillor as well, and they see some merit in that. But I thought it was a really I haven't heard of this sort of model before, when a councillor is temporarily unavailable.
This sector keeps throwing up surprises, doesn't it? That one caught me off guard as well. While we're in Queensland, the Local Government Association of Queensland this week has welcomed the introduction of some legislation by the state government, which will see an overhaul of the councillor conduct framework. And people who've followed the Queensland situation in recent times, they've had that situation where there was a review because of the Office of the Independent Assessor and some controversy. The Logan case is one that comes to mind, and a range of recommendations that came out of that review or that inquiry, which look like being implemented if this legislation goes through.
Yeah, I did see some of those. Ability to declare a vexatious complainant. Bringing time limits on the processing and receipt of complaints under their sort of councillor conduct framework up there. So there might be some jewels for us here in Victoria that come out of those legislative reforms in Queensland.
Yeah, some preliminary assessment steps, I think, which is about, doing an initial assessment on something before it goes too far down the path, which might have helped in some of those controversial cases. Tony, going overseas quickly, we talk often about councillors and the risks that come with not declaring conflicts of interest or corrupt conduct, etc. We've got 3 former councillors at Toledo City Council in Ohio who've been jailed. Pretty extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. Accepting bribes was what they were convicted of, and well, it's these phenomena occur around the world occasionally, and it's a sad thing, but it's just a reminder that we're not unique with some of the issues we've seen playing out in a very minority of councillors in Victoria. But Toledo, I wondered where Toledo was in the States and went and looked it up and saw it's on the Great Lakes. But
it is, yeah.
Chris, I know that you're a bit of a country music aficionado, aren't you? Is that right?
Well, I'd say that's incorrect. A bit of implies just minor interest. It's far more extreme than that, Tony.
Oh, so you know Kenny Rogers, wouldn't you?
Well, I did. I actually did meet Kenny Rogers.
Oh,
yes. So I can say I sort of knew him. I met him once. Yeah.
Not dropping names. Well, I wonder if Toledo ever came up in the conversation, because one of Kenny's big songs comes out of
in a bar in Toledo.
A bar in Toledo, that's right, in 1975. So you know all about which song was that?
That would be Lucille.
Absolutely right. There you go. I didn't know that until I looked that up yesterday.
Well, there you go. Well, I think we'll have to. I know one of our regular listeners, Mark Dupay, will be interested in a regular segment on the intersection of country music history and local government.
We go everywhere in this show, folks. We take
we do. I just want to make another point about that Toledo story. The amount of money wasn't huge. So one of the councillors took 10,000, another 5,000, another 1,500 in return for their support on voting matters. But this has been pursued by the FBI with great seriousness, and they say that finding and investigating public corruption is one of their highest priorities. So it just puts it in a bit of context, doesn't it? And they've been jailed for one of them for 2 years.
Yeah, and invariably sometimes where we see really significant bribes being taken, it starts with something small. It starts with something minimal, and I think rightly so. We should sort of crack down on this, no matter how sort of seemingly minimal the pecuniary numbers are. Yeah.
Yes. All right, we'll leave that one and a bar in Toledo across from the depot and move on to Tony's pick of the week. The peacocks are calling, Tony.
Yeah, North Queensland, which is always dangerous on this show to go to North Queensland, I think. We're talking about an entire street of residents in Townsville have received a letter from the Townsville City Council warning them against feeding peacocks. Apparently, there's a community safety hazard here. There's it's been described a little, hasn't been taken so well by the residents. It's been described as a bit of over the top. Someone said it was kind of Karenish. But some residents said they didn't even know there were peacocks in the street. And the council spokespersons admitted that, look, feeding birds doesn't breach the local laws. However, the resulting noise and the mess that the birds leave might create a community safety hazard, which would be problematic, Chris.
Yeah. So not illegal, but most people seem to agree, at least on Yahoo News, that the letter from the council, this is Townsville City Council, was excessive. I just noticed they've got a poll on that story, and I clicked yes, it's a fair point, just to give the yes case a little bit of support, but it's 21% to 79% saying no, it's excessive. So I don't know, would you feed the birds, Tony, if they're on your street?
Oh, they left a few peacock feathers behind, maybe. Maybe. But have you heard the noise a peacock makes? You might not feed them.
Wow. They do make a bit of noise, don't they?
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to hear that early in the morning.
Not regularly. Yeah, fair enough. All right. Thank you for drawing that one to our attention, Tony. Before we go, Julie Reid can't be with us, as we've explained the last couple of weeks. She's touring the UK at the moment, learning all about the local government situation over there, as well as, I think, in finding some time to enjoy herself. And she was spotted. If we can have a look at this picture, please, JLF. She was spotted on the streets of Manchester. This is just this morning. So there's proof that she's getting around. She was in Scotland last week, Manchester this week. I've got a theory that she's there for the Davis Cup tennis, Tony, which is being played in Manchester as we speak.
There you go. I didn't know that.
Closeted tennis fan, maybe. I'd be going to the tennis if I was in Manchester. All right, Tony, let's wrap it up there. Lots, as always, happening around local government land. I don't know if you've had a chance to catch up with our VLGA Connect special episodes this week. We had Roberta Ryan join us from the University of Newcastle to talk about some of the Operation Sandon recommendations, which I notice is striking a chord with the audience. And we've got a new local leaders that came out yesterday with the Mayor of Hepburn Shire, Karen Foster. That's well worth a watch or a listen on the podcasts.
Great listens and great watches, and commend them to people. There's some great, real range of diversity of views and people and themes there.
Absolutely. And more to come. Stay tuned. Tony, thank you. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again next week on TGU.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, viewers.
Tony Rownick from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors of TGU. That's it for now. Thanks for your company. We'll be back soon. Bye for now.